Welcome back, everyone. This is Larry Morris. This is session 8 of my set of YouTube videos on how to self-publish your book on Amazon. And today we're going to talk about a little known and usually not used aspect of Word, how to use styles in Word. And then we'll talk a little bit about the offshoot of that, how to build a table of contents. First of all, the big question I get is what are styles used for? And to answer that, we'll go through a series of things here and discuss each one of them. One of the things that becomes important as you're writing a manuscript or any large document is you need to be able to manipulate the text as a whole and change things such as font, type size, justification, a plethora of things that normally you don't even think of assigning attributes to the whole of the document. But that's one thing that Styles is really good at. Text, if you set it up right, text in the manuscript can be manipulated at almost any level very quickly, so you don't have to run through the whole document making changes. It is normally used at the paragraph level. Almost everything in Word, if you haven't caught on to this yet, happens at the paragraph level. It is possible to use the styles feature at not at a paragraph level, meaning text within a paragraph. And that gets a little bit touchy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It vastly helps ensure that all of the text units that are supposed to be the same are in fact exactly the same. They're all the same font, same type size, same justification, and so forth. And particularly when you're dealing with headings or possibly quotes where you have to put an actual quote from a person or another document inside your manuscript with the proper citation, and we'll talk about that also. Word does support a standard set of styles, which we'll look at in a moment when we get to the next slide. But you can create new custom styles very easily. We're not really going to talk about how to do that today because that's another long, complicated process. But all we're going to talk about is how to use the built-in ones that Word provides. And there's a lot of them. Usually there's enough to handle any kind of data you want to use in a manuscript. And then obviously one of the benefits of using styles is that you can use this process to get Word in a position where he will create a table of contents for you and maintain the page numbers that are associated with all the entries in the table of contents. And that's a very powerful tool, so you don't have to chase things down in the document whenever something moves. It'll be handled automatically. And the last caveat I'll bring up is that you can still do manual formatting. For example, taking a sentence out of a paragraph and changing the font or changing it from normal to italics or to bold. But keep in mind that when you do something manually, it will override a style selection that you have. So if you have everything set up in a particular style, and then you change part of a paragraph, and then you change the style, that part that you changed manually typically will not be affected. So you have to keep that in mind. You may have to touch things after that if you make changes outside the norm. Now, where to find the styles in Word and what they look like. there are two different scenarios that you will deal with. One of them is, and by the way, this is all based on your screen size. If you're working on a laptop and you don't have a secondary large screen, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see one block that simply says styles. If you're working on a desktop that has a large screen, or you have a large screen connected to your laptop, this is probably what you're going to see. You're going to see a larger dialog box for styles, and it's actually going to have some of the styles in that box. Normal, no space headings are usually the first three that show up. The thing I would point out is that in the bottom right-hand corner of each one of these styles boxes is a little icon that looks like this. What that icon will do, and we'll see this on the next slide, is it will open up the entire styles box for you to work with, so you don't have to work inside these small spaces. If you click on that little icon in the lower right-hand corner, this box will pop up and it will be docked or stuck to your working space on the right-hand side of your document area, and it will shift the pages over to the left. And you'll see what this looks like when we get to the example. But they do that for a reason, so that you can scroll through your document and this particular area never changes. It's there for you all the time. The jagged blue line right here simply means that there's more space in here than I've represented. This box will go from top to bottom to fill your entire Word working space. So it's a little bit larger than this. This usually contains the default set of styles that's available whenever you open any document. And you'll be able to see clearer when we get to the demo, and we'll mention exactly what styles are there and which ones you will probably use the most. And in this session, we're also going to cover how you can set up a style in detail to specify the font, type size, and things like that, and how to use it to control text and how to build a table of contents. One thing we're not going to cover in this session is this area down below at the bottom, which is where you would be working if you wanted to create a new style that doesn't appear in this box. Now let's get into an actual Word demo where I can show you exactly how to use the styles and what you can accomplish with it. Okay, first of all, let's look at some text and go through a little overview, noting where I have headings and subheadings and things like that. And this is the text we're going to be working with. Taken out of context, it doesn't mean anything, but it's parts of one of the books I wrote. But you can see that I have, in several areas, I have a heading 1 listed, which are the chapter headings. And every chapter has a subheading, which is heading 2. And I'm going to define those differently in the document. And one of the chapters, chapter 3, again, it has a subheading, as I mentioned before, but it also has intermediate paragraph headings, if you will, and I'm calling those heading 3. So I have the headings labeled 1, 2, and 3. So the next thing we'll talk about with this overview is how to dock the styles. And all I'm going to do is, and notice I have the small version of the styles since I'm working on a laptop. First thing I'm going to do is use that little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of the styles box, and that will dock for us successfully that styles dialog. And notice it's a little easier to work with here and a little easier to talk about because it's larger. But if you'll notice, the very first thing that pops up on it is it defaults to what Word calls a normal style, and we'll talk about that. It also has involved in it the actual headings, and it gives you the choice of 4 different heading levels, and we're only going to use 3. If you need more than 4, that's where you would get into this area down here and create another style. And the other style that we'll briefly talk about for purposes of discussion is the quote style. And then the last 2 are TOC, which stands for Table of Contents, and it will initially give you 2 of those, since you may have 2 levels of Table of Contents. Most people have at least 1. Some books have 2 levels. Some books that I've worked on have as many as 4 levels of Table of Contents. So that will adjust automatically when we get ready to build a table of contents. So don't worry about the fact that in your particular situation, you only see 2 here, and you may be working with 3 levels. Whenever you get ready to build a table of contents, Word will automatically add the 3rd table of contents style because he knows you're working with 3 levels. Okay, the very first thing we'll talk about is what's in a style, how do you update it, what kind of controls do you have, and in order to have that discussion, we'll talk about the normal style. That's usually the one people work with first before they get to headings. And in order to look at what's in a style, all you really have to do is right-click on the style, and this box will pop up, and you'll notice there's a modify in the box. So select the modify, and you will get a larger box pop up that lets you control the basics of what this text is going to look like. And you see things such as font, type size, presentation, bold, italics, or underline. You'll see justification settings here, spacing, single spacing, double spacing, triple spacing. You'll see paragraph indentation, markers, and spacing between paragraphs. So you'll see a lot of specific controls right at your fingertips up front. Most of the real complicated processing happens in the lower left-hand corner of this larger box. You'll see a small pull down and it says Format. Now, if you click on that, you will have lots of options, and these are normally all of the options you have available to you on the home screen up here, such as font settings, more detailed font settings, editing settings, and things of that nature. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the paragraph settings. And that when we click on paragraph, the standard paragraph box that you should already be familiar with will pop up. And this is where you specify what kind of justification you want, any particular indentation left and right, any indentation like the first line. If you click on first line, you get to say half an inch or 3/10 of an inch, and control the spacing before and after a paragraph. And then what kind of line spacing do you use? And I typically use two different kinds of line spacing. Sometimes I'll use 1.15 and sometimes I'll use 1.07. It just depends. You can, if you want to, look at the tabs situation, but I would recommend for most processing that you not do the tabs at this point. You can if you want to, but you can define your tab stops if you like to do tabs. And I've always cautioned people that if you're giving me data to do formatting for you, don't use tabs. Because one tip I can give you is that if this manuscript is going to be transported to Kindle, sometimes Kindle doesn't handle tabs as effectively as you would think it should. So I usually avoid them. But they do come in handy in one place, and we'll get to that in a moment. But once you get all of this defined and set up and say, okay, you have defined what all the text in the document will look like. To the point of, and this is one of the, as I mentioned before, this is one of the most powerful aspects of styles. Let's get back into the style, into modify, and change the font and change the type size. And as soon as you say okay, the entire document is changed because it was classified as normal. Now, the one thing that a lot of people wonder, well, how do I set it initially? And we'll talk about that in a second when we get to headings. But let's put this back to where it was. Times New Roman and 12. And again, if you don't like ragged, you can do right justification, or actually do left justification. And you get rid of the ragged right or the justified right, and you wind up with a ragged right. It just depends on how you want that text to look. But let's talk about the headings now for a second, and how to change a paragraph from the font it is to a new font using the styles. Let's open up the heading app or style and click on modify. And this is, sometimes this box looks the same, and sometimes you lose track of where you are in the list of styles. You can always take note of the fact that the style you're working with is always up here in the top as the name. So you can't, if you're conscious of that, you can't really make a mistake by changing the wrong style. And I have the style defined, heading 1, as Times New Roman, type size 16, bold, and centered. And that's all I've done. I haven't done anything with the paragraph settings or anything else. So now if I decide to actually get these headings set up the way they're supposed to be, I can put my cursor anywhere in that heading and simply click on heading 1 and it will change it automatically. Ignore, if you see them, these little blue lines from time to time that pop up. I still have my grammar checker turned on, and he's on me all the time about certain things, but he's not too good about keeping track of where those lines are, so don't worry about those. Now notice that heading has changed exactly the way we wanted it, and let's look at heading 2 and see how I've organized that. I have it Times New Roman, but a smaller text size of 12, and it's set up as bold. But I did make a change down here in this area. Let's pull up the formatting list and let's look at borders. I set up a border, a custom border of 1 1/2 points, which is this thickness, and I have specified it that I want it on the bottom of whatever I'm working with. And notice you can set this any way you want to, so you can build a box or only have one line. And the effect of this is that whatever text I assign this style to, it will effectively be underlined with a line this thick. So that's set up that way. So let's put our cursor in the middle or even at the beginning of heading 2 and click on heading 2. And now you can see that it is organized just the way I mentioned it. It's a smaller font and it's completely underlined. So let's go through and change all of the fonts. This one is a heading 1, and this one is a heading 2. This is a heading 1, and this is a heading 2. And now these are those paragraph subheadings that I have set up with style number 3 to just make it bold and 12 point and left justified. So we'll get all of those assigned to the right style. And again, this is heading 1, and this is heading 2, and that's the rest of the document. Now, one of the things that I do when I'm working on a manuscript for me or for someone else is I usually don't work with or mess with setting up the styles and applying them to the headings until I'm all done with the rest of the manuscript. Just a tip. And let's set this normal style back to the way that I usually have it, which is fully justified left and right. And notice that changed it again. And again, another good way to handle all of the text in your document. And now we have the headings set up. Now let's look at how to potentially, in the middle of a paragraph, have a quote that you want to attribute to someone else. And let's say that that quote is this sentence right here. So what I'm going to do is put a carriage return there, and at the end of that sentence, put another carriage return, and I have the quote style set up to be Times New Roman 12, no presentation attribute, and right justified, but I'm going to add italics to the quote. And then put the cursor at the beginning of that and click on quote to assign it to that. And now you have that quote indented quite a bit, because let's look at the format again. I have, if I go to paragraph settings, I have specified in the paragraph settings an indentation left and right of 0.3 inches. That's what got me that. Now, if you need to attribute this to someone, it's a simple matter of dropping down one line. And one of the keys to putting the authors of that quote in there is using an EM dash, which you can get in Word by, first of all, turning on, and you have to have a keyboard. There's another way to do it, but the easiest way to do it is with a keyboard that has a number pad on the right. Turn on numlock and hold down the Alt key and key in 0151, and you'll get an EM dash, which is a longer dash, and it just sets off the quote correctly. And then you want to right justify that quote like that. Now let's talk a little bit about doing the table of contents and how to make Word build the table of contents. First of all, let's undo this and get rid of this. My favorite, as I've mentioned many times before, one of my favorite usages is that little undo command up there, and I'm going to use that to undo what I just did. There, that's back to normal now. Now let's talk about actually building a table of contents. One thing you have to realize is that when you build a table of contents, and let's say we're going to build it right here, it's going to insert that table of contents where you have the cursor. So it's going to push everything down the line in Word. So let's immediately insert a page break. So we move the text down to the next page, and we'll put in the table of contents on this blank page. Now, to begin the process of actually building the table of contents, we need to go to the References tab, which is up here about in the middle of all the tabs. And we're going to pull down the table of contents, pull down, which is right there. We will, in a few moments, show you how to use this command, update table. But right now, we're going to initially build the table, and that's where you use the pull down in the table of contents area itself. So let's use that pull down. And I'm going to say custom table of contents, which is all the way down at the bottom. And there's a lot of options on this screen, but right now the only ones we're going to talk about are the ones that you can use to normally build a table of contents. I could probably have an entire session on just this screen and all of its ramifications and how to actually do this correctly. So the very first thing I'm going to do is change this levels from 3 to 2. Because you noticed we had 3 levels of headings. We had main headings, heading 1 and heading 2, and then we had subheadings in the middle of a paragraph that was labeled style heading 3. The only ones I want on the table of contents are heading 1 and heading 3. Heading 1 is the name of the chapter, and heading 3 would show the reader if there are any subheadings underneath it. Heading 2 is really only relevant when you're looking at the headings on the chapter. I don't want it in the table of contents. So I'm only going to do 2 levels, and I'm going to select options. And if you'll notice, that pulls up a block that shows me I have heading 1 defaulted to table of contents level 1, and heading 2 defaulted to table of contents level 2, but that's not what I want. I want to eliminate that and then say I want level 2 of the table of contents level to be heading 3. That gives me heading 1 and then any heading 3 headings that I have assigned. And then if I click OK, there's my table of contents. Now, there's several things you can do with it beyond just a normal vanilla table of contents. And that's where these entries over here come in handy. One thing that you will need to do on every table of contents style is get into Modify, get into the Format section, and click on Tabs, and make sure you have a tab at the 5-inch marker specified as an alignment right tab, and then say OK. This also gives you the option to specify what kind of leaders you want, dashes or none or a straight line into that tab stop, and I've specified dots. Doing that tab stop at 5 inches as right justified allows us to be able to, when we build the table of contents, and let's get back into the custom build again, allows us to say right align page numbers. You have to have a place where it knows it can right align them, and that's that 5 inch. If you don't have a tab stop there, or you have it too far out, like for instance, if your document trim size is 6 by 9 and you have that tab stop set out at 6.5 inches, you're not going to get any leader dots or right justification on the page number. So it's going to look kind of odd. So you have to be careful how you handle that. You have to have a tab stop there to make that work. Now, to do some of the other things that you might want to do, and try not to confuse the fact that you have styles that control what the headings look like in your document. These styles control what the heading entries look like in your table of contents. So if you need to make changes to how the table of contents looks, you need to go to these styles. For example, get into the paragraph style and say perhaps you want, and again, we're looking at the chapter heading 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say after each of those paragraphs, I want an 8-point space. I'll see what that has done. But in order to make it work on the last one, because you have specified an 8-point gap, and you have that here, and you have it here, and you also have it here, which is okay, but you don't have it here because we haven't set anything up for these table of contents entries yet. So let's get into table of contents 2, which we're at, and get into paragraph. And say I want an 8-point here, but also check don't add space between paragraphs of the same type. And what that's going to do is give us a space after that right here to make all of these look consistent now, but it's not going to give a space in between these because these are paragraphs of the same type as far as Word is concerned. And the way I've engineered this indentation that you notice here is, again, not by changing these, because again, these control how the heading looks in the document itself. We need to control how the heading entries look in the table of contents. So let's get into TOC2, which is Table of Contents Level 2, and get into the paragraph setting again. And notice I have an indentation set on the left of 0.7 inches. That's where that indentation comes from. That you see right here. So that is a quick overview of how to build the table of contents in Word, or rather how to have Word build the table of contents for you. Now notice, and now I think we can get rid of that and look at this last option that we'll talk about. Notice that the page number for chapter 1 actually is page 2. I don't have page numbers, but that is because this would be page 1 and this is page 2. So what would happen if we inserted a new page at this point? By insert, pages, page break. Now this chapter actually starts on page 3. And again, if you do this in several places and shuffle text around, you're going to make sure the table of contents accurately reflects where that data is. Well, right now, it doesn't because it still has the old page numbers in there. So what you need to do after you've made all the changes is get back into references. Now pull down, or rather click on the update table, because you have a table now. You have a table of contents. If you click on update table, this box pops up. You're given two choices. One is update page numbers only. The other one is update entire table. If you have made changes, for example, to the text of one or more headings, then obviously you want to update the entire table because those need to be corrected. If all you're changing or all you want to update are the page numbers, you want the second option that says update page numbers only. And Word's very good at that. He keeps track of all of this. So if you specify update page numbers only, and remember this was all in 2 and then everything else was on page 3. If we update the page numbers, now this is specified as page 3 and these are all on page 4. Word will continue to keep track of those and allow you to make, for example, any change in the actual headings themselves to be able to reflect that change in the table of contents. And I think that covers a lot about using styles. It is complicated, but I encourage you to play with it because it will give you an enormous amount of flexibility in controlling what your manuscript looks like and how you can handle all of that text. And thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll get notified of all the new videos.